Welcome, everyone, to the Success Elevated podcast. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Lee, and I am joined this week by my co-host, founder here at Spot On Solutions, Katie Harris. Thank you for joining again today.
You bet, Hayden. Happy to be on here today.
It's going to be a good one. We have a very special guest coming on today. We had to get our schedules all lined up, and he's a very busy guy, so we appreciate him joining us for a little bit of his time today. But one of the founders here of Albiware and the CEO, Alex Duta. Alex, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Hayden, Katie, thanks so much for having me. It's an awesome pleasure, and I'm glad we were able to make this work.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, man. We've talked a lot about Albiware just here with our clients. Before we started recording, we were mentioning to you how we have a lot of clients that use your platform and love everything that comes with Albiware and all the integrations and the awesome stuff that you and your team are doing over there. But I think kind of the first initial piece that we've got to dive into first and foremost is, who is Alex Duta? And let's jump in and talk a little bit about your career background. Give us some info about just kind of how you got started in the restoration industry. I know that's a cool story in and of itself with your family and the awesome things they've been doing over there in Chicago. And so I'd love to kind of just kick it to you and let's talk a little bit about your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to dive in. So yeah, I'm Alex Duta, first generation immigrant. So my parents moved from the beautiful country of Romania in Eastern Europe. Awesome story there. Dad came from a village with no running water, communist Romania. The communist government ended up being overtaken. Democracy kind of became a thing in Romania. My parents were entrepreneurs pretty much their whole life, and they kind of rode that wave of post-communist regime. So they actually started selling Turkish clothing and American pens in Romania because it was the hot new thing, right?
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, Eastern Europe during communism, you didn't have outsider goods. So my father ran into a company that would sell pens that were misprints from the States. And instead of throwing them away, they would sell them in these types of countries. And anyway, long story short, through that, his friend from the States, who was his business partner, applied for my parents for the green card visa. And it's like a lottery, and they ended up getting it. So in the late 90s, my parents ended up winning the rights to move to the United States, started all over again, moved here. And actually, fun fact, first steps that I took were actually on American soil. So I'm like the definition of the American dream. So it's very near and dear to my heart. And my parents were very hardworking people. I grew up basically seeing them work very hard, do all kinds of odds and ends jobs. And, in my teens, I watched my father as he was a subcontractor for restoration companies. So I would often go to work with him, and he would basically rebuild houses or, apartment buildings that were burnt down. And he was the subcontractor to a lot of the larger restoration companies within the Chicagoland market. And I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. In high school, did snow removal and sold printing and promotional material as kind of like a side hustle. And at one point, my father and I were sitting on a beach in Mexico, kind of talking about what's next. And we kind of came up with the idea of, hey, instead of him being the subcontractor for these restoration companies, why don't we just start our own restoration company that can be just kind of the parent umbrella, work directly with insurance. So that's where I was.
I didn't know that you and your dad kind of started that together. I thought your dad had it and you grew up into it. So, but you were.
My father had it for sure. He just had a different version of it. But yeah, so it was he had these relationships with these restoration contractors and had a lot of experience as a subcontractor. So he knew how to do all the reconstruction work specifically, and he knew there was an industry there. His number one fear was selling jobs and how are you able to get the direct insurance work. And in my book, I talk about it. I feel like we had two different personalities. I was the young, more abrasive, not super polished kid who had no problem going and showing up to a fire and trying to sell somebody on something.
No fear in your body. Is that how you kind of ran things there for a while?
Yeah. And if you would have met me in the early days, you would have probably thought I was very rough around the edges, which I was. And yeah, very, I don't know if ambitious is the word to say, but that's a polite way to describe my personality at the time. And my father was very operational, very meticulous, very organized, very proud, had a lot of, integrity and perfection behind him. So we made this really dynamic duo. And yeah, we started, that was 2014. We were still in his garage. And by the time I stepped away from Exera to start Albiware, fairly large company, 80 or so employees, 30 trucks running around Chicagoland, and full service restoration contractor.
It's amazing. I didn't realize, again, Katie, we're learning new things. I feel like we thought we knew the story, but that's a short run. I mean, 2014 to now, I mean, that's 9 years. And you guys have built, I mean, that Rome Exterra is blown up into this huge piece of the restoration market in Chicagoland, which is a testament to obviously the dynamic duo that you guys are, which is really cool. But before we kind of move on, there's one thing that I thought was really cool, that it's something that Katie and I have noticed in a lot of the guests that we've had on our podcast, because I think Katie recognizes it in herself, is this idea of like a serial entrepreneur. Like, you just can't help it but be an entrepreneur, right? Like, and I think it's so fascinating for me. So do you feel like that's, you mentioned snow removal in high school and some of those things that you did. Is that just something that you came by naturally? Was it like the example of your father and your parents, just kind of what their desires to sell and be their own business owners? What kind of instilled that in you to want to like be an entrepreneur?
I definitely think that the hard work portion came from my parents. They definitely instilled hard work, grit, perseverance. Throughout this fast journey that I explained, they've hit rock bottom like 3 separate times. So going from poverty, no running water, to empire in Romania, to rock bottom again in the States, to empire in the States. They had a mini real estate empire before 2008, to losing it again, to back up, right? So hard work and perseverance was definitely, I think, a skill that was taught. As far as the entrepreneurial spirit, I think that typically the serial entrepreneurs you probably referenced to, and Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, typically are just very passionate about solving problems. And typically problems just show up in your life and you just want to do something about it. So the snow removal business,
like
in high school, go ahead.
I think it's fun how you say that, like problems show up, and rather than seeing them as problems or challenges, right? It's easy to sometimes just see the opportunity and get super curious and be like, what if, and how about, and all of a sudden you end up with a new business.
Exactly. Yeah. So like the snow removal business was, I was helping build a website for this guy who did commercial snow removal. The phone was ringing off the hook, and there were residential snow removal leads, people who needed their snow removed. And there were a ton of them. There's nobody in the market to do it. And he didn't want to do it because there were houses and they were low dollar amount. And he focused just on commercial. I'm like, what if I just do them? So it started with, okay, I'll go get a snowblower and a shovel, eventually evolved into these trucks. The idea of Rome Exterra was more, hey, I'm young, looking for something new to do. You see potential within this industry, but you don't know if you could sell. Let's work together and solve that problem. And then eventually it evolved into something bigger. The idea with the book, which isn't necessarily a revenue driver, it was an entrepreneurial project, but it's not necessarily something that's, a business. But it was, hey, there's no business self-help books dedicated towards restoration. And there's amazing, 10X rule, Atomic Habits, all these amazing books out there that teach amazing principles, but nobody's taken those principles, applied them to restoration, battle tested them, and then put something end to end on how to restoration, right? So that was kind of the idea behind the book. And then Albiware was, hey, we need a system to run our business off of at the time. And then that evolved into 5 other people saying they needed the same thing. And then it turned into this other business, basically.
So I love what you said right there, where it's like, what if I just do it? Right? Like, what if I just do it? And and I think that's probably the thing that most entrepreneurs can really relate to, is that idea of, what if I just do it? Most of the time having no idea how to actually do it. But that's where it starts, right? What if I just do it? And I think that probably leads us into a good conversation about your book, because that's kind of the same thing, right? There's not really a book out there that takes these principles and applies it specifically to restoration. Was there a moment you're like, what if I just do it?
Yeah. In the moment was when one of my mentors, Dan Martell, launched his book, Buy Back Your Time. So he had been talking about executive assistants for 3 to 4 years that I had known him. And, you know, I had hired an executive assistant because of him and so on and so forth. When he launched the book and it hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, and I saw the amount of impact, and he went into it not expecting the impact. He just wrote it because he wanted to leave behind a legacy. And I saw the impact it had and how many people were digesting that book and taking action upon it. I was like, the light bulbs kind of went off. And I was like, what if we do something similar that can impact the restoration industry further? So that's where it started. And it was in February, actually, of 2023, almost a year ago, that the idea popped into my head. And yeah, 2 weeks ago, the book launched on the Amazon stores and hundreds of copies have been sold so far. So I'm super pumped.
I love it.
That's so
tell
cool.
us a little bit about it. It's Restoration Millionaire, right? And it is available on Amazon. I'm going to give you a minute here to just kind of plug it for yourself, Alex. And then I want you to talk about, I want you to tell what it is, where people can get it. Give it a nice plug, because I think it is full of some really great insights. We work with a lot of restoration owners, and they want the specific, like the information, but how it applies specifically. So if you want to talk about maybe a few of your favorite things and what you learned as you stepped into that book writing process.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find it on Amazon. Also, it's available in Kindle, hardcover, paperback. And then I also recorded the audiobook, which was a really hard process. Props to all the narrators out there. As far as the book, I mean, there's a lot of different frameworks within the book. The book won't teach you how to dry a building. I think we have a lot of amazing technical knowledge within the space, but there's very limited mindset and framework content or information out there about the restoration industry. So the entire book is focused on basically breaking down those mental barriers that a lot of restorers have. And I'll give you an example of one. Like, we talk about the reactive roller coaster, which most restorers go through. So at what point, you know, you just started your business, the first thing you need is to focus on sales. So you focus on sales, nothing else. You bring some jobs in through the door, and then you forget about hiring. Now you've got a bunch of work, but you don't have enough people. So you focus on hiring, and you really forget about the sales. So you're going out there looking for the technicians, project managers, so on and so forth. And then you realize that you did all this work, but you forgot to bill for it. So then you focus on billing and invoicing, and you forget about the other two things. And then what you do is you focus on collecting because you've invoiced all this, but now your cash in the bank is looking very low. So you focus all in on collecting that cash, right? You bring all that cash back in, and then lo and behold, you're back to no sales. And then you're just up and down on this reactive roller coaster where you're just reacting to all the different inputs. And a lot of small business owners they don't really look at data, and they don't really have a framework or a way of looking at the business. They're very reactive and emotional. If the bank account is full, that means business is going great, right? And everything lags behind one another. And we felt that too. You know, when we got from $1 to $3 million of revenue in our restoration company, we sat down and questioned ourselves, why in the world did we get to $3 million of revenue? Because we had less money in the bank account than we were doing $1 million. And that was also because of the same exact thing. We were focusing on one thing, forgetting about another thing. So my favorite quote that came out of the book is that hustlers fail at scale. So when you hustle, when you try to hustle and bustle and bring a business, that's great to bring it to market. But afterwards, as you start getting some people, you need to really build the muscle, which is the systems in place. So that way you can get those consistent results. And you need to have a way to look at the business holistically. So the whole book basically outlines a restorer's journey from 0 to 10 million of revenue, the different phases, the different things that they need to learn. And it gets super tactical on things like SOPs, things like how to market. We plug online marketing as the best source to get into the market within, you know, your first million, which wonderful companies like SOS could help with. And just a lot of very tactical things. Writing the book too, I hired this amazing editor who helped me frame the stories and then frame the action items at the end of the chapters, which was super cool. Because I realized, like, my draft of writing and regurgitating all this stuff into the world wasn't good enough because it wouldn't be super interesting. So Paul Fair, who had actually edited the whole thing, he had this whole framework on how to write, tell the story, go dive into the stuff. He helped me, you know, put together frameworks, and then at the end of each chapter, an actionable thing that the restorer could walk away with and implement within their business. So
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's always my gripe. I feel like with I shouldn't say a lot of these self-help books, but there are self-help books out there that are so great, have great stories, but there's no tangible thing of like how I can apply this. And I love that they were like, hey, let's take your stories and then say, okay, this is what you can apply to you as a restorer. I think that's awesome. Awesome stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Alex, with that book, I know a lot of that knowledge obviously comes from what you learned with Rome Xterra and working with your dad, but I know that originally with Rome Xterra, and the problems that you came up with and you dissected there really kind of became the birth child for Albiware. And I
Mhm.
know that in a lot of ways, Albiware, you've come to learn some more things. I'm sure helped kind of develop your book and all of these things. I really think that this is a perfect time to kind of talk about where Albiware got kicked off. And I know, we talked about being a serial entrepreneur. We talked about the idea that you wanted to solve a problem, and you're like, why not me? That's why you wrote the book. I'm sure a lot of that same kind of feeling is what came to want you to want to start Albiware. What for you, and then you can kind of go whatever direction you want to go with this, but was there a one singular problem that you felt like that the industry wasn't solving and that's what led to Albiware, or what kind of came about to the initial early days of you starting that business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there were a lot of business operational problems linked to the way we were gathering the data we needed to be able to make business decisions based off of. And I won't name what software solution we were on in the past, just for courtesy and respect. But we felt like there was a lack of easy to use, easy to adopt, innovative software within the space, and that tech within restoration was more old school. So the provider we were working with would like send us an invoice if we wanted to change one little thing, or if we would give them a product enhancement that we believed was beneficial for the entire industry. And, the straw that really broke the camel's back was we got a $20,000 invoice to change the sync in QuickBooks from customers to projects, which is something I felt like all restorers needed. And when we were going outside of the restoration industry, companies like Service Titan, who we respected a lot, being we saw Service Titan as this innovative product for the home service industry. They didn't want to sell to the restoration industry due to the fact that the restoration industry had a very complicated workflow. So the whole idea was there is no product heavily vested in building innovation for restoration. And we saw that most of the tech solutions were kind of aligned on the insurance carrier side. There was a movement within the market that way. And we decided that whatever would take our business to the next level was innovative, easy to use software like what existed in other industries like Service Titan. So the premise at first was, let's build an end-to-end workflow management tool. And then the biggest thing was from phone call to completion. So when I looked at 33-mile radius, for example, they had a portal where every single phone call or every single lead had this ability to have notes because you were disputing it or not disputing it, whether you pay for it or not. And I was like, what if that became our project? And I remember messing around in the portal, and I did a quick inspect element for those who know what that is. And I noticed this thing called Twilio was what was powering the back end of that. And that started this rabbit hole of researching Twilio. And I realized that Twilio was this, programmable voice system that, you could do a lot of crazy things with. And I was like, oh, well, the number one way a restorer gets a project is through a phone call. So what if we could turn a phone call into a project, eliminating the napkin notes when you're taking in a job, or
Yep.
the let me wait for the app to load and then type it all in. And that was the premise that it started. And I was looking for a technical co-founder at the time. I kind of went through my network, and one of my best friends from college was an engineering manager at a local software company. He was on his way to Microsoft at the time. And I'm like, hey, I know you're interviewing at Microsoft, and I know all this, but can you at least help me find a technical co-founder to help me just build this thing for our company? I knew nothing about software at the time and the business potential. And he decided, hey, this sounds really interesting. I'll hold off on the whole Microsoft thing. Helped build it. And, we had a team, an offshore team at first, to build the first product. And he got a lot of buy-in for it. In the meantime, I started researching a lot, learning more about building products, building software. I read a lot of books like 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel and a few others. And I realized that software was an industry that you could have a lot more impact than in restoration at the scale we were. So what I mean by that is my father and I had no interest in going out and franchising Remixtera or opening up multiple locations. We were kind of going to keep the company on this, healthy growth trajectory, but it wasn't like we were exponentially growing. I had this desire to do something more. And I was like, okay, well, and there was a lot of instances where colleagues within the industry were interested in the software we had built to run our restoration company off of. So that's kind of where the idea of Albi becoming a company and going to market came. And then afterwards, I realized that in order to build good product, you can't build good product offshore in a contractor kind of mentality. You need to create a muscle of people that are excited about innovating and create that muscle. And we realized that we couldn't create that muscle without serious dollars to invest into that. So that's where the whole journey began, where we began fundraising. We actually applied for this thing called Y Combinator, which is like the Harvard of tech startups. Companies like Coinbase, Airbnb, stuff like that were started from that incubator. And then that just kind of started this snowball of investors being very interested on this technologically lagged industry and our thesis on how we can improve it. And that ultimately led into a 3-year run, close to $10 million raised, wonderful product things that have been built, 70 amazing kick-ass rock stars that, live and breathe innovating for this unsexy industry. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, which is even more exciting. So,
oh yeah, that's amazing. Katie and I have talked a lot about, and this is just something that's, been going on in the industry now really since 2008. But when it comes to restoration, that all of this VC venture capital money is coming into the industry. Do you feel like that changed the trajectory of Albiware? Do you feel like you noticed some of that influence? And obviously you guys were able to do some amazing fundraising with that. Do you feel like, maybe pre-2008, or do you feel like pre all of this additional investing in the restoration industry, you guys, you get the same kind of buy-in from these investors? Or do you feel like that in a different time period, maybe this isn't something that takes off as much as it has for you guys over the last 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two separate inflections of capital within the industry. I think we're noticing a private equity move where there's roll-ups within the restoration industries happening and restoration companies taking on money. And then I think you look at a separate thing like the tech market. So the tech market right now is way better than it was in 2008 for sure, but there was companies that boomed there. But there were times like in Service Titan's time, 2015, 20 to 2018, that like tech companies were raising money like crazy. Like money was super cheap. It was a commodity. Right now, it's a lot harder to actually raise capital than it was before, just because interest rates are significantly higher. So, to put it in perspective, a tech company in 2015 maybe had to be top quartile or top 30% in order to get funded by a VC. Right now, a tech company needs to be top 5%. So the bar just got that much harder. And that's kind of what's going on in the space. Now, without venture capital, do I feel like we could have had a similar impact? Probably not. And that's probably why the restoration industry tech solutions, like other than Nextgear that got obviously acquired by CoreLogic, and I wouldn't even put them in the VC bucket either, there really isn't venture-backed technological solutions innovating within the space, specifically in the job management space. The closest thing might be Company Cam. And you can actually see the difference between an app like Company Cam, for example, and other apps within the space. You see how like users really rave about Company Cam. You see how like they actually use it. It's life-changing because there are millions of dollars poured into the simple problem of taking photos within the space. Matterport, right, did an amazing job. And they weren't just restoration specific, but same thing. When you're able to get those investment dollars and put them to work in the product, you're able to create something, 10 times better than, what would exist before. So without a doubt, it helps.
10 times faster.
And 10 times faster.
That's the other thing. You might be able to get it to that quality level, but it's going to take a whole lot longer to get there.
Exactly. Unless, you're a self-made restorer that's made 10 to 15 to $20 million by some way, shape, or form, and you self-fund it, that's another, option. But that's also very hard. And I don't know how many restorers have been able to accomplish that up to this point.
Have $20 million sitting in the bank somewhere. They're just ready to pump into an app. But I think again, the core of this whole piece, the core of Albiware, the core of the book that you've written, all comes back to you saw a problem, and instead of being like, oh darn, that problem, that stinks, and just dealing with it, you said, hey, let's solve this, let's figure this out. And I love that, and I think that it speaks to that. The evidence of that is you were going to create this software just for Rome Xterra. You were creating a solution. It was like you were handcrafting a tool. It's like, I need this axe to chop down this tree. I need this special axe to do this. I'm going to create this thing for me. And then, oh, hey, maybe actually my buddy down the road could also use this axe or whatever, right? Like you created this tool to solve a problem for you and to, be a solution for you and your team. And you're like, oh man, maybe this can actually help others as well, which is, I think all of the best businesses that are started have a similar story to that. I think it's similar, Katie, to your story with Spot On Solutions. Like you and Michael solved a problem for Derek with his restoration company, and that's all you were really trying to do. And then eventually, like, oh, hey, maybe actually we could kind of turn this into and help other businesses, right? And kind of explode it from there. And I think all of the best businesses start from that initial idea of like, hey, I just have a problem, I'm going to solve it. And then maybe down the road, hey, this actually could help others as well, which is really cool.
Then I think it takes you to the magic words, Alex, that you said, which is, why not me? Right? I see the problem. Why not me? So
yeah, it's amazing.
The Success Elevated podcast is brought to you by SOS Navigator. SOS Navigator is an on-demand training platform geared towards marketing, personal development, and business growth. We understand that as a business owner in the service industry, you wear a million hats. Let SOS Navigator be a simple and cost-effective way for you to continue to grow your business. Click the link in the show notes below and use code SOS Podcast to get 10% off your next on-demand training course.
Was there a point, Alex, and this kind of, I think, is more maybe big picture, because we talked about the cool things that you guys have done in Albiware over the past few years, but was there a specific moment that you were like, this life is going to be different now? I'm no longer just working on this on the side to maybe help Rome Xterra. Was there a moment you feel like, or was it just like fast forward 3 years, like, what the heck have I done? Like we've got $10 million in funding and all of this, and I've got 70 employees. Like, did you just kind of get caught up in it all? Or was there a moment where you're like, life is different now?
What are your pinch me moments? Because
maybe that's a better way to ask it.
There's moments where you're like, that just happened. This is happening right now. Yeah.
There was a huge realization. So, April 2020 to call it December of 2020, I was all in, heavily focused on both, right? So I sat as, within the general manager role at the restoration company, all in on growing the restoration company. And on top of it, a lot of burning midnight oil for Albi. And come November, we actually went to the Violand business management retreat with my father and Captiva. And, we were sitting and reflecting upon the next year. And I kind of also thought about Albiware, and I was like, I don't think I could do two things and do them very well. I was at that point. It was, again, back to 16-hour days, back to burning the midnight oil. And I was like, I got to pick one. And the whole plan, it was a very uncomfortable conversation, because the whole plan prior to this crazy idea coming up was I was going to buy my father out. He was going to happily ever retire. Everything is fine. And I had to sit and have the uncomfortable conversation with him that, hey, this other thing came up, and I don't think we're going to go through with this plan after 5 years of the lifeline and the light at the end of the tunnel for my father being this. And it was a very uncomfortable conversation. But we got to a conclusion, and he was very supportive of the Albiware idea, and he saw the bigger picture. And luckily, he didn't strangle me for wanting to shift gears. But that was kind of like the aha moment. We still didn't have crazy revenues, and we weren't heavily funded at that point. It was me and my co-founder funding it at that point. But we knew that to take it to the next level, we had to dedicate our time. So in November, I went full time. He stayed at his old job, kind of flipping back and forth. And then by June of 2021, he shifted over full time. But we didn't get real funding, and we were paycheck to paycheck, like meaning, we were burning our own personal money, not knowing if this thing's going to pop or not, for quite some time. It wasn't until like February of 2022 that we got into Y Combinator. So there was a whole year of like back of the shoebox. We were in this small office in Rome Xterra, right? Online meetings over in India, burning literally the midnight oil, trying to build this thing, running into issues, signing customers, trying to transfer them over, data transfer didn't work, or signing customers, they thought it did this and it didn't, and they left, and all kinds of things that we learned from. And I would say that period of time was very interesting. So
That's
interesting.
amazing.
Just let me like tell you what interesting means in entrepreneur words, Hayden.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, translate for me.
Interesting means really kind of fun, but also quite horrible, right? Like,
Terrifying.
like super stressful, completely terrifying, day by day grind, pure grit, right? With this like somewhere deep down assurance, without a doubt, that you're gonna kill, right? Is that true?
It'll work.
Like,
yeah, you described it pretty spot on. We would sit and we'd be like, it's gonna work. It's coming along, right?
Like,
and
no matter how long the days are sometimes or what it looks like, there's still this something that's firing it. That's like, this is gonna be awesome. This is gonna be awesome. I remember that kind of takes me back that whole time frame, because I believe we were in Captiva at a Violan business planning retreat. And I think we sat with your business partner at lunch at Doc Ford's, right? And we sat there and we're like, okay, listen, like this is the plan. This is what we're going to build. And everything that you're sitting there with today, like, even though it was not the reality in that moment, you knew that was the path. How you were going to get there, maybe could have taken a million different routes, but the determination that you were going to get there was hot, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so many entrepreneurs look for the magic bullet. We just did our early release webinar today for the book. And, somebody was telling me, oh, so what's the secret sauce to restoration marketing? I explained certain things. I was talking about, online marketing first, then referral marketing. And then, oh, well, does insurance agent marketing really work? We're starting to run into all these headwinds, and, insurance agents don't want to send us work and stuff like that. People constantly want to find the easy way. And like the answer was simply, yes, insurance agent marketing still works. It's just gotten a lot harder, and you just have to keep going at it because the alternative is no work. So it's up to you. But nothing is easy. And if it was easy, everybody would do it. Like if it was easy to raise capital from venture capitalists for restoration software, I would sit here and have 6 other companies that I'm running a race against to build the most innovative product, right? So it's like, same with restoration companies. If it was easy to market to insurance agents, there would be no differentiator between you and the next restoration company. You want it to be hard, and then you want to figure out how to do those hard things and how to do them very well. So
I love it. I love it, Alex. And I think this question, I think, kind of ties into that, and you've kind of answered it already for me, but I'm curious to see if there's anything else. Do you feel like, is that what motivates you? Is it the challenge of it is what motivates you? Was it, 3 years ago when you're sitting at Captiva, was it the insurmountable, not that it was insurmountable, but the idea of like, we're going to try and blow this thing up and we're going to burn the midnight oil? Was that kind of in and of itself what motivated you, or are there other things that motivate you to continue to grow today? I mean, you guys are still on a rocket ship right now to the moon, but what is there anything else that motivates you other than maybe just, solving these problems?
Yeah, I think the number one core thing that's motivated me since day one of Rome Xterra was creating an impact, utilizing my intellect and my innovation. Those are kind of like the secret recipe. Like I've always loved, like the problem solving kind of gets your brain kick, the intellect kick, right? And then impact was always huge for me. Like there always were opportunities to make more money, but there would be less impact. I've always seen myself kind of shy away from those and always look into how can I make more impact. And restoration was special to me because the impact that I felt I had on people's lives was tremendous. I mean, I have thousands of stories where you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you save the kitten from the basement of the fire, right? Like that's huge impact to a lot of people. And, sometimes, waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning for that $500 or $1,000 job or for the job that you lost, but
Yeah.
you were able to educate that customer and let them know, don't worry, this isn't that big of a deal that you thought it was, just mop it up. That was huge for me. And that's what drove me through everything. I mean, through the polar vortexes, through absolutely everything. It's you're there for a reason. You've got purpose. And even now, I mean, we could stop. I mean, by the age that I'm at, I feel like there's been a lot of things done, a lot of amazing things. We can stop, but why stop? Like what excites me is the tremendous amount of impact in this amazing fragmented industry. 50,000 to 100,000 restorers out there, where companies around the restoration umbrella that are all super small. They're all not, brought together or unified by anything. They all believe that, they're in this tiny industry and that they're alone. Why stop when you could shine your light and show what you were able to do or show best practices and such to that industry and elevate it? And the thing that excites everybody here at Albi related to impact is the fact that we're impacting hardworking men and women that are making a difference in people's lives. It's not like we're in healthcare tech where it's like, oh, healthcare is cool, right? And it's important and helps people in times of needs, but it's like you're helping these large corporations or conglomerates. It becomes a numbers game. Within restoration, you're truly helping, the Bob Smith and the Michelle Smith of the world, who is out there putting food on their table while helping people through the toughest moments of their lives. So
you're helping first generation immigrants, and you're helping people who, maybe are the first person to graduate from college in their family, or haven't graduated from college, but are building a dream for their family. Yeah.
Yes.
Katie, I think I came up with the title for Alex's autobiography, and it's Creating an Impact. I think that's such a cool way to sum up what you're talking about, Alex. And you mentioned it multiple times there, but everything you've talked about today, the book and Rome Exterra and your parents' story and everything is all about like creating an impact for people that you care about, and for customers, and for business owners, and all of the different types of people, and all the different situations that we've talked about today. Alex Duta, Creating an Impact. I'm going to be looking forward to your autobiography at some point here, and you're going to talk about all those cool things. But anyways, everything you've talked about today, Alex, has been awesome. And I love everything about it. And I think what you are doing at Albiware is so cool. And I think a good way to kind of put a bow on this whole conversation that we've had today would be the story of how you guys came up with the name Albiware. Because it's not Alexware, it's not Dudaware, right? Like you guys obviously came up with a different name for this cool, amazing software that's making an impact on your customers. How did you come up with that name?
Oof, hitting me right in the feels, Hayden.
Got to.
Yeah. So we had this product, and obviously, it was working, and we knew we needed to create an entity out of it, and we didn't know what the heck to call it. So my co-founder and I were sitting, and we were just kind of brainstorming. And at the time, the vision, and it still is, we want to bring AI to the industry. So we're like, okay, it's got to be something like AI related. And then we're like, okay, AI, like you think of Bixby, you think of Alexa, right? Okay, so a futuristic AI kind of sounding female name, because we're, in a male dominated industry. Sorry if that's not politically correct, but we're like, okay, let's do that.
It's a fact. It's a fact.
So we're thinking, and we're like, okay, and it must mean innovation. It must have some sort of integrity to it. And, we were sitting at my co-founder's apartment. My wife was there with me, and we're just, running names across. And backstory on me, my wife and I got very close. She was a foreign exchange student from Colombia here. Her mom actually ended up passing away. And that was kind of like a marking moment for us within our relationship. We grew very close. I was a big supportive system for her, eventually got married, so on and so forth. And her mother's name, so my mother-in-law's name, is Albi with a Y, actually. It's short for Alba Nelly. And that name just kind of rolled off the tongue really well. But also, she fit the values of what we wanted to instill within the company. So she always thought outside of the box, was very innovative. To put it in perspective, she was one of 12 kids, one of 7 women in the family, and the only woman who drove in Colombia, right? So that was very unheard of and not really common at the time. So we're like, okay, well, we're going to name the company this, and we got my wife's permission to do so. And that's just kind of where the name came from. And then we're like, okay, well, Albi is the product, so we need some sort of software for Albi. So then we named the company name Albiware, and that's kind of where that comes from. So
it's amazing. Again, I think that you've had that story, or a kind of an abbreviated version on your website, and I've read that multiple times. Like, gosh, that sounds like such a cool story. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, because I think it sums up everything that we've talked about today, and creating an impact in who you are and the values that you guys have. And I think it's a great way to kind of close things out. So last but not least, Alex, this has been an awesome, awesome episode. We've got some great value that I know our listeners are going to love. We're going to close by asking the same 3 questions that we ask all of our guests. It's kind of a great way to unite all of our episodes, and a cool finishing touch, I guess I should say. First and foremost, you've got a book there on your desk, obviously. So we've talked a little bit about that book, but if you did have to name another book or podcast that you really like, or that you're listening to or reading right now, what would you give us?
Ooh, a ton. I mean, read books, period. Like, any problem you have, go find a book, because it's an author that struggles with the same thing that you're struggling with for a lifetime, and condensed it into something you read in 4 to 6 hours. But like remarkable ones, like I'll plug my mentor's book, Buy Back Your Time, super huge. It's by Dan Martell, and it's essentially how you can value your time as a entrepreneur. And then first hire that you should make is some sort of executive assistant to be able to offload those tasks, and then refill your calendar back up with higher level tasks that really light you up and move your business forward.
Love it. Great recommendation. Second question. I know the days might not quite be as long as they were before 3 years ago, but you probably still have some long days, burning the midnight oil, as you've mentioned. How do you relax or recharge the mental, emotional batteries at the end of a long day?
Yeah, so I have a whole wind up and a wind down routine.
Perfect.
So winding up requires getting up. I actually get up super early, 4:30 in the morning, and I focus the first couple hours of my day on my mind, my body, my spirit, and providing value. So that involves cold plunging, that involves meditation, that involves journaling, reading, hitting the gym. I don't know if I mentioned that already, and then doing one high power valuable task. And then at night, I typically wind down with my family. So my wife and my little baby daughter, 2 years old, I typically journal to pour everything out, spend time with my wife, and then like right before bed, I will meditate or do some sort of breath work to wind down. And that kind of completes that rhythm to wind down and go into sleep.
Perfect way to describe it is a rhythm. And I love that some of our recent guests have done some similar things to you, where it's like, it's not necessarily how they ended it. Ending the day is important and recharging is important, but it's also how you start the day. Like, you've got to start the day in the correct rhythm to make sure that you can wind down at the end of the day. You can recharge and do all those things. It's a lot of it's how you start. So I love that.
100%.
Last question. And you can kind of take this a variety of different ways, so feel free to kind of do whatever. But if you could rewind to the beginning of your career, whether it was the beginning of your career at Rome Xterra or the beginning of Albiware a few years ago, if you could rewind to the beginning and tell younger Alex one thing, what would that one thing be?
The only person that's going to be there with you at the end of this all is going to be yourself. And that's the person you probably are not investing enough in. So your role in the world should be to build the best version of yourself. And then once you've filled that cup and you fuel that up, then pour back into the world with that best version of yourself. And that includes personal development. That includes your health. That includes your love, your relationships with, your loved ones. And obviously it includes your wealth, which, is also directly tied to business. but you can't pour out of an empty cup. So you need to make sure that your cup is filled and you 10x yourself. And that's the number one sacrifice that I think people make. And I've made that sacrifice too, where you don't take care of yourself. You is not important. Everybody else is. So give yourself permission today to make you your top priority, because that's who you're stuck with forever.
Love it. Alex, what an awesome way to close things out. Thanks again so much for coming on the podcast. Your stories were great, and we loved everything about what you shared with us today. And I know our audience is going to get a lot of really awesome value out of it. One final plug. You've got the book there, Restoration Millionaire. It's on Amazon. They can find it there, or Kindle. Plug for Albiware. Obviously, they can go to your website, but any other plug that you'd like to do?
No, I mean, just follow me on socials. I pour a lot into the world. It's Alex Duta on all of your favorite social media accounts.
Love it. Perfect way to close things out. Alex, again, thanks. We hope to have you on again in the future. We can talk more Albiware or just life and entrepreneurship in general. Thanks again.
Absolutely. Hayden, Katie, thanks so much. This was super fun.
This has been Success Elevated, making you a little bit better one show at a time. Thanks for joining us. Please subscribe on YouTube or any other major podcast platform to listen to more episodes. We are proudly brought to you by Spot On Solutions. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help you grow your business, please check us out at spotonsolutions.com.